So my research was focused on carbohydrates' influence on performance and athletic mentality in youth endurance athletes. Now, just looking into it at baseline, anyone looking to work out or just exercise in general needs energy source. They need some way to go through their workouts. And it's already been examined pretty heavily in the field that carbohydrates can be a really good source of this energy. They can improve performance, but specific effects on actual mentality during performance have been less examined. And questions arise regarding this because people are looking for the best possible diet that can help them achieve their maximal performance, but also feel best while working out. So a perfect diet would allow people to work out better, more efficiently, and just have fun with doing it. The body undergoes a process called glycolysis to make energy out of carbohydrates, and it uses this to replace the glycogen stores in the body. It creates a chemical called ATP that is essentially the energy your muscles use to just contract and do your workout. And having extra carbohydrate supplies in your body can create a larger amount of this ATP that your body is then able to use to get energy for the workouts. So, reviewing the literature of the study, Adriano Lima Silva found that longer lasting energy came from athletes consuming higher amounts of carbohydrates prior to their actual workouts. In this graph he had in his actual study, he found that people in a high carbohydrate diet had a longer time until their perceived exertion or until they felt that they were done mentally than on a control diet. And he actually tested a low carbohydrate group and found that they tired a lot earlier than on a normal diet. And this showed a pretty strong correlation between carbohydrate intake and the actual perceived exertion of athletes and when they tired out over the whole process. Melanie Finke looked at other related variables such as sleep deprivation. She looked at day-to-day sleep cycles and how the change in sleep over a time, she used 2 months, in elite athletes would affect their performance. And she specifically tested fine motor skills in athletes such as cyclists and their ability to control really small movements. She correlated the effect of these sleep variations with performance cyclists and found that as people slept less and less, as their sleep day variations got larger and larger, and they had bigger gaps in their sleep cycles, they were able to perform a lot worse. And they had worse psychomotor vigilance, or this fine motor skills. They couldn't perform their sports as well as they could. So this gives me another variable to look into for my study, and I want to try to eliminate all outside variability so I can determine the way that carbohydrates specifically influence the diet and people's perceived exertion, energy levels, and overall mentality during the workouts. So outside variables like sleep and stress, as outlined in Finke's study, would help me eliminate this variability. So my research question, how can a high carbohydrate diet affect the performance and mental state of youth endurance athletes during prolonged exercise? A lot of related research has been done on the way that carbohydrates can affect actual performance metrics, but they use a test pool of elite male athletes in top categories of their sports. I want to look at youth athletes specifically, as this has been a pretty big gap in the field, and no one has answered the way that a high carbohydrate diet could affect a different body, one that's going through a lot of development and growing through its whole process, and one that naturally needs more nutrients than others. For my method, I used a quasi-experimental method that I needed to create a new test pool for my data. A lot of other related research came up with good data showing that carbohydrates had a positive correlation with actual performance increases, but I didn't need this elite data. I wanted to look at a youth audience. So I picked 12 high school male endurance athletes to examine over the course of a month and see how a high carbohydrate diet could affect their overall performance increases and the way they actually felt while working out. I used this experimental diet, heart rate monitors, specific sport measuring equipment, maybe for runners, you could have a time, just some way to measure the actual increases in performance over the time of a month, and maybe weight lifted for lifters and things, just some way to quantifiably get a way to measure performance gains as a result of this high carbohydrate diet. Other studies did use an experimental method, which is what led me to mine, and I didn't want to use a content analysis. As I've already said, a lot of other research didn't look at the specific test pool that I needed. I needed to make my own group of testing that I could use for my whole experiment. So I made my own experimental diet based off of related research to try to outline the best guidelines for carbohydrate consumption to achieve maximal performance. I used a survey to collect all my responses in the way that people improved over the course of the diet, but I also got a lot of qualitative responses in the terms of people's mentality over the result of this entire trial. I have included a sample question such as, did you have any new records? And please explain how much you improved by. This gave me my quantifiable performance metrics as a result of the high carbohydrate diet. And then I had some qualitative questions such as, does eating more carbohydrates make your exercise feel easier? Did you feel better? Did you feel more rested throughout the day? I also asked qualitative questions like this during specific interviews with some of the people during my study to really get a good grasp of the way that carbohydrates could affect their mentality. Here's a result from the form. People said this made me feel better. I felt like I had an extra boost from the carbs, which led me to not feeling as tired or hungry, and it was an easier workout than before the study. So my results. Carbohydrates' specific effect on endurance. Over the whole course of the trial, there was an average increase in performance of 3.3% over a month from the baseline performance metrics that they reported before the entire study began. 50% reported feeling they performed better, and 75% felt that they had more energy and could do more while on this modified diet. Over the whole course of the study, no one said that they felt worse on the high carbohydrate diet compared to the regular one. And 52% said that they felt worse on a low carbohydrate diet when compared to their average before coming into the study. 78% of the participants who felt that they had eaten enough coming into the study reported that they had done better during their workouts, and this often correlated with how much they reported in terms of grams and carbohydrates they ate before the study. Those participants that said they didn't eat enough had less in the 0 to 25 gram range and had lower performance improvements over the course of the study. 67% of the participants reported a gain in performance, and 0% actually lost performance over the course of the study. Youth athletes naturally increase in performance. This is a result of nation athletes and the way they progress over time. But 0% over the course of the entire study actually lost performance due to the carbohydrate implementation in that new diet. Carbohydrate intake versus performance. I used 4 separate groups to categorize the way that people ingested carbohydrates. I had the 0 to 25 gram group. This is nothing to a small snack before working out. The 26 to 50 gram group, which is maybe a bagel or a small sandwich. 51 to 100 grams, which is what I recommended for the athletes coming into the trial, which could have been a full lunch or at least a meal before the trial, and over 100 grams, which would have been comparable to a large dinner before you actually worked out. The average across all categories of carbohydrate ingestion showed an increase in performance while on the diet, but the largest average increase in performance was in this 51 to 100 gram group, or that recommended daily allotment based on other research. They had the largest average increase of 4.5%, almost double what the lowest category was. But it's also interesting to note that this increase was above the 100 gram group. There was a drop off at some point. There was an optimal middle range of carbohydrate ingestion that maximized performance well over the course of the trial. One participant said he felt better throughout the day and had more endurance during a workout, and it made his workouts a lot easier. This also came after the workout. He said he felt less sore and more motivated throughout the day as a result of the new diet and the energy he had on the entire course of the trial. People in the 100 gram group often felt more, as they put it in interviews, bloated or lethargic during their workouts, and they didn't have the energy that would have been expected off of a higher carbohydrate allotment. This 51 to 100 gram group was the optimal range for both carbohydrate effect on actual performance metrics and the mentality of athletes during their workouts. Now, as examined in other research, sleep and stress could have a pretty measurable effect on the research, and I added this into the questionnaire to test whether or not athletes would have any effect due to these outside variables. I initially put this in the study to try to eliminate any outside variability in my data. I wanted to look specifically at the way carbohydrates could affect the data. And a lot of people came in at the average. They were rested, ready to go. And a bunch came in above average. This 83% is what I was looking for. But I also had this group of people in the study outside of this average, or outside of what I tried to use to eliminate any variability in my data, and this produced some pretty interesting side narratives. Sleep level versus performance increase showed that well-rested people, 8 hours or more of sleep, had a much higher average increase in performance of over 5%, This is double what was the average, I said was 7 to 8 hours, and below 7 hours was only 2% increase over a month, or a third of what was seen in the maximal group. Participants that had better sleep had much more significant increases in performance, and over the course of the trial, they said they felt better with each workout. They didn't feel as lethargic or slow. And people in this not rested group, it almost counteracted the positive benefits they gained from the carbohydrate diet. It made their gains lower than would have been expected off the average increase of 3.3%. This group saw lower average improvements. These participants also reported feeling better while on the high carbohydrate diet, the people in the 5.5% group. This could have been due to the actual diet itself or the sleep, but everyone in this group reported feeling better on the diet. They didn't say there was no change and they didn't say it was worse. Whereas people in the not rested and average categories were the only ones over the course of the trial to report that they felt no change in the higher carbohydrate diet, or they actually felt worse while on. Stress had a similar effect on performance, and I created a combined sleep and stress score to test whether or not these outside variables would have any effect on the overall athletic performance. I rated each of these on a scale from 1 to 5 based on daily averages and recommendations for sleep, such as 8 hours or not being too stressed, and I added the score up from 1 to 10. My lowest score was 4 for the sleep and stress, and I had a highest score of 10 on the sleep and stress scale, and I plotted all these points against the average daily increase, which yielded this graph showing a pretty positive correlation of 0.55. Now, this isn't a strong correlation, but it's also worth noting that this could have been due to the nature of the trial where people were on a high carbohydrate diet. This could have tried to counteract the effects of specifically sleep and stress. But these did have a pretty measurable effect on the actual data we see. It's also worth noting that this trend line would go down negative with sleep and stress scores lower than 2, resulting in negative performance effects or actual losses in performance over the course of a trial, but further research would be demanded to actually test whether or not that would happen. Those who entered workouts with higher stress had lower overall improvement, and those who entered with higher sleep had higher overall improvement. And sleep and stress often came together. People who had slept more, who reported the form with a 5, also had lower stress, who reported their form with a 5, and followed the workouts better. Those people with lower sleep and stress scores often followed the workouts a lot less, couldn't stick to it, and they felt more lethargic and tired over the course of the entire trial. For my conclusions, Nafinki outlined in her ending of her conclusion in her research that age could be a pretty significant variable that she didn't test for and she hadn't seen in a lot of other studies. My study directly answered this question to see whether or not age could be a variable and whether or not it could affect athletic performance with regards to carbohydrate intake and actual sleep and stress on the athletic diet and mentality. Carbohydrates benefited performance over time as well as the energy levels in youth endurance athletes. Over the course of the trial, everyone on the diet performed better than they would have, or better than they did coming into the trial. They saw greater average improvements in their performance, and they felt better while on the diet. They said they felt more rested, more ready to go, and more energetic throughout the exercise. Sleep and stress both had clear relationships to performance, and they were often very negative. People who slept less and were more stressed had lower average increases in performance, but the carbohydrates would often counteract or at least keep it in the middle where all participants had an average increase and trend positively over the course of the trial. This study had similar results in comparison to a lot of other related studies, but further research would be required to determine whether this would be true of elite youth endurance athletes. I looked at a group of 12 high school athletes who were competitive in their respective sports, but none were elite or internationally competitive, as often examined in other studies. This could be a possible limitation in my data when people are looking for the optimal diet for elite athletes who are working maybe over 2 or 3 hours in multiple practices a day. But for the average high school athlete, this study could be applied to get better performance over the course of a month and better dietary and mental effects over the course of your exercise.
Terrific. Thanks, Ian. That was impressive. I've got a few questions for you, and then we can wrap this thing up. Okay, for the first question, how did your review of the methods that were used in the studies you read early on in your research process, how did that review of their methods lead you to select the method you did, and why?
So initially I was looking at a content analysis. I thought that would be the most interesting, just to examine other related research so I could get both a larger test pool and very conclusive results on the way that carbohydrates would actually affect athletes. But after reading a lot of the research, most people didn't actually look at youth athletes, and this led me to my experimental method based off of a lot of related research to get a new test group, a new test pool for these youth participants to figure out a new guideline for younger athletes. And in a lot of other related studies, they used just these elite athletes who the results could be used to compare and gain better performance improvements, but this often doesn't compare in the same way to people just starting out or working out initially.
Terrific. Thanks. As a follow-up question, what are the real-world implications or consequences that are related to your findings?
So anyone looking to just increase their performance over time in exercise needs a diet to follow and generally just a way to improve themselves and improve their body. And any athlete looking to try to get better performance would want to limit sleep and get more, limit stress and get more sleep and eat more carbohydrates to give their body the energy they actually need. So any athlete looking to just improve performance or feel better in general could use a lot of the conclusions made in this study to achieve a better diet and achieve a better feel in their respective sport.
Okay, terrific. And then the final question. What was the most important research skill that you feel like you obtained as a result of engaging in this process? And what do you think you could do with that skill in the future?
So I think while picking through my data, I found a lot of, not inconclusive, but just less correlated results than I would have imagined. And I think it's important to be able to contextualize data and see the bigger picture in a lot of cases where, such as the carbohydrate drop-off, where they were above 100 grams of carbohydrates and their performance got a little bit lower than the optimal group. It looks like they're not highly correlated because the correlation would show that it increases indefinitely. But when you actually look into the study, like people felt a lot less energetic. They felt like they were bloated, lethargic. They couldn't get through the workouts. So it's important to be able to contextualize data, take what you need from results, and be able to think about it in a broader context than just the way that people might have felt throughout the trial.
Terrific. Thanks, Ian. Great job.